Daniel, thanks for joining us. So the European Central Bank is to raise interest rates by 25 basis points. It's the first rate hike in 11 years. So first off, I want to get your thoughts on that. What is your reaction right now in light of this?
I could say it's a disappointing and slow move, because if you think about it, the European Central Bank at the same time has significantly increased its inflation expectations. So only hiking by 25 basis points is very behind the curve, in fact, and extremely concerning, because it looks like the European Central Bank is looking at the possibility of delaying as much as possible the very needed normalization of monetary policy. In fact, it is also looking at options to curb the possible increase in the yield of some of the sovereign bonds, which sounds to me like a very dovish position.
Now you mentioned it's behind the curve, but there's concern that with the war, sanctions, and uncertainty, the European economy is going to slow down even without raising interest rates. So the inflationary pressures are going to come down anyways. So then, is the ECB facing a tough balancing act in light of all this?
It's a very good question. The ECB is stuck between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, if it normalizes as it should, the risk of seeing higher sovereign bond yields is important. But on the other hand, if they don't, inflationary pressures will persist, because it's not just about the war or supply chain disruptions. So the monetary effect of those inflationary pressures has to be dealt with, and quickly.
Now, on the point of inflation, food prices are rising and there's concern of a shortage. Now, you've written an article on the Epoch Times. You say, besides the Ukraine war, a possible reason for a food crisis is government intervention. Now, this is interesting to me. Can you explain to us why that is?
Well, think about this. Even before the Ukraine war or the pandemic, the agricultural sector in developed economies has been suffering from elevated taxes, increased environmental and regulatory burdens that have made it uneconomical to produce grain in numerous developed economies, particularly in the European Union. So now the problem is that many of those farms and many of those crops around the world simply cannot come back to the market and reduce the risk created by the Ukraine invasion, because it is uneconomical for them, even with the elevated wheat, barley, and other cereal prices. No?
Now, on this point of being uneconomical, can you give an example of a government policy that's led to this?
Oh, let's think about, for example, the increase in fuel taxes, the increase in CO2 taxes in the European Union, the increase in the cost of labor coming from higher labor taxes in the European Union. So a lot of small things that have been added over and over. But if we think about figures from 2018, German, French, Spanish crops were loss-making even before the pandemic.
I'm curious, just for a contrast, how does the US and Europe compare in terms of government intervention?
The US is a lot less than Europe. In the US, labor costs are much lower than in the European Union. The US does not have CO2 as a tax. In the United States right now, everybody's extremely concerned about $4 a gallon. Anybody in the European Union would feel privileged to see those prices, which are almost half what we're paying in most European countries.
Now, a food shortage, there's many parts at play here. I'm wondering if you could tell us what can be done to avoid a shortage.
It's very difficult. It's complicated, but the only way to alleviate a food shortage crisis coming from an invasion of one of the top producers like Ukraine is obviously to diversify as much as possible into other possible suppliers.
Daniel Lacalle, Chief Economist at hedge fund Trices, thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much.